Thomas, pode iniciar quando quiser.
Okay. Bom dia a todos. Good morning to everybody. Today we are having this panel about ESG. And first of all, let me introduce myself. I am a lawyer, president of the National Coordination of Brazil and China Relations in the Bar Association in Brasilia. I'm also president of Ibrachina, that is a social cultural institute that has the goal and also the mission to promote the cultural integration between Brazil, China, and countries that speak the Portuguese language. And today I have the honor to be the moderator of this important panel with authorities from Brazil, South Africa, and India. Our panel is about ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, and it's organized by the Center for BRICS Studies of Law School of USP, of the University of São Paulo. And beginning with our speakers, I will introduce, first of all, Rafaela Mello Rodrigues de Sá. She holds a Master in International Relations from PUC-Rio, and she's also Bachelor in International Relations from the Catholic University of Petrópolis. Is that correct, Rafaela? And currently she's a research assistant at the BRICS Policy Center, and she's focused in her interest on international political economy, BRICS development, and international institutions. She will be the first speaker, and then the second speaker will be Magalie Masamba from South Africa. Magalie. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights. She was formerly postdoctoral researcher at Boston University Global Development Policy Center, a legal specialist for the Rhodes Bank PPP support program for Tanzania, and also Oxford Policy Fellow advising the Ministry of Finance and Planning of Zanzibar. And she also holds a Doctor of Law degree from the University of Pretoria. And also from India, Rukmani Joshi. Is that correct, Rukmani? Is the pronunciation correct? She's assistant professor, political science at School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Sharda University, Greater Noida. She was completed her PhD from the Center of the Study of Law and Governance from JNU, New Delhi. And she also has been a recipient of Indian Council for Social Science Research Doctoral Fellowship for the year of 2014-2016. So I'll now pass to Rafaela to talk about her speech. Her speech will be about how ESG is present in the BRICS Business Council and the BRICS Bank agenda. The idea is to present the main characteristics and the debate on ESG in the BRICS Business Council as an institution that centralizes these business discussions with BRICS. So, Rafaela, the floor is yours. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello, good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank you the invitation to participate in this event. For me, it's an honor to be here composing this roundtable on ESG in BRICS. And like Thomas said, today I will present some aspect of ESG in two BRICS initiatives, not only in the BRICS Business Council, but also in the BRICS Bank. And I will try to bring some characteristics from Brazil in this aspect. So I will share my screen here. Well, everyone is seeing here the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. In the sense, I will present a brief summary of the main topics of this speech. So first, I'm going to introduce some aspects about ESG agenda, its relevance in international scenario, and its main players involved. Then I will approach the central characteristics of BRICS Business Council, trying to understand the role of these institutions to promote ESG agenda among BRICS companies. And finally, I'm going to present the main aspects related to ESG in the institutional governance of the BRICS Bank, trying to understand the place of environment and social issues in the institutional activities. Well, to start this discussion, I think it's important to understand what ESG means. So ESG stands for environment, social, and governance, and represent a set of standards for a company behavior. In this sense, the organizations seek to adopt principles that will guide not only the preservation of natural resources, and also the reduction of social inequalities. In the environment sphere, it may include issues like corporate climate policies, use of renewable energy sources, reduction of waste and pollution, and natural resources conservation. So ESG considerations can be help evaluate any environment risks a company might face, and how the company is managing those risks. So in the sense, we can remember the cases of Mariana and Brumadinho here in Brazil, and how the Brazilian company Vale had to deal with the risks and the impacts caused by the environmental disaster. Well, about the social aspect, it represents elements related to the company relationship with the internal and the external stakeholders, understanding how the company manager relationship with employees, suppliers, customers, and the communities where it operates. So in a manner, the companies could promote diversity, inclusion, and social justice in this sphere. Finally, on governance standards, the company is encouraged to use accurate and transparent accounting methods, pursuing integrity and embracing diversity on the board of directors. So in the last few years, the ESG started to emerge as a more proactive movement, being more complete proposal than the corporate social responsibility actions, which was related to philanthropy and donations with tax incentives. In this way, we can perceive a mainstreaming process of the sustainability agenda within the companies and organizations, especially with the increased attention by major powers such as China and United States for this agenda. Beside that, with the great relevance of climate change, energy transitions, and sustainable development, aspects related to environment, transparency, and human rights have gained even more importance, being the center of the international debate. So for investors, environment, social, and governance considerations are a growing priority, defining criteria that drive financial market investments. This is because the ESG investors seek to ensure that the company they found are responsible with the environment, with the social issues, and the governance. For this reason, multiple players are taking ESG issues into consideration, such as companies, banks, and financial institutions. So, in this sense, it's relevant to understand the position of the two initiatives in the BRICS sphere. This is why I will present the BRICS Business Council and the BRICS Bank in the agenda of ESG. So, first, it's important to comprehend the central characteristics of this initiative, the BRICS Business Council, trying to understand the role of the institution to promote ESG. Well, The formation of the BRICS Business Council can be understood as a strengthening of the BRICS Business Forum that has been taking place annually since 2010. The council was founded in 2013 in Durban, South Africa. The council's aim is to establish a platform to strengthen and promote economic, trade, business, and investment ties among the business communities of the 5 BRICS countries, as well to ensure that there is a regular dialogue between these communities and the government. So the council can be understood as a consultative mechanism of the heads of the states that discuss the private sector priorities to strengthen and promote trade and investment relations, identifying not only challenges, but also the opportunities of the sector. So in this way, the council allowed the construction of a space for dialogue between the business groups of the BRICS countries, enabling coordination of interest and cooperation in various sectors. And this could allow a development of a common agenda. So we can point some the main demands of this group, such as instruments that facilitate trade, like the expedition of business visa and harmonization of technical standards, or mechanisms that promote investments like infrastructure for payment in local currency, and cooperation infrastructure and connectivity. And more recently, the demands have been more focused on the solution to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, seeking a post-pandemic recovery under the Sustainable Development Agenda. So regarding the organization structure, the council is organizing into 5 national sections. Each section have 5 leading CEOs, a chairman elected, and a secretariat and a set of members, including companies and business organizations. The chairmanship of the council rotates annually according to the host country of the BRICS. And the president and the members from each country meet to discuss general agendas, but also is divided in thematic work groups. The working groups discuss and select policies and technical recommendations about their sectors and express areas that most demand investments. So with this, the annual report that is published show recommendation and directing to the government sphere. So the sector that are encompassed by this working group are infrastructure, manufacturing, aviation, the regulation, agribusiness, energy and green economy, skill development, digital economy, and financial services. Well, considering these characteristics and the position of the council, which brings together companies of the 5 BRICS countries, this framework can be interpreted as an appropriate space for discussion on ESG to take place within the group. During the meetings, there are much potential for dialogue and cooperation on ESG, both in the search for a more sustainable investments, but also in the improvement of the company's internal practices. Over almost 10 years, the main themes that have been addressed in the council reports reflect elements related to ESG agenda, but it was only with the popularization of this criteria in the last 2 years that it has been possible to identify more concrete initiatives. So in 2020, the Council annual report presents the idea of creating a BRICS ESG association to improve transparency and increase ESG scores for BRICS companies. With the context of the growing role played by responsible financing, BRICS countries are vulnerable to low ESG scores from international assessors because they use methodology that do not fully address the realities that exist in the BRICS countries. For this reason, the idea is to establish a unification for the approaches adopted by the BRICS countries toward ESG. In this regard, there is a need for methodology and additional services to support the ESG certifications of the companies. Thus, it would help to increase the capital flow into BRICS economies and improve the ESG ratings for goods and services from BRICS companies, providing better opportunities to export. Last year, the report also announced the concrete initiative giving details about the BRICS ESG Association, which was formalized. This initiative was formalized in 2021, last year, with an aim to promote and improve efficiency and transparency ESG space that would help to increase the capital inflow between and into the BRICS economies. So the idea is to improve the experience of sharing ESG metrics, to increase ESG adoptions in the BRICS nation, and increase the data comparability, as well to create a ESG index by BRICS nation, followed by a benchmark of indices, and to measure the relative performance of these companies. In this way, it will enhance the green rating of the companies and straight the value chain, positioning BRICS nation as a clear choice for other countries to facilitate international trade and attract private investors. Now, I would like to comment a bit on, I would like to comment a bit on the Brazilian organization that actively participate in the Business Council and plays an essential role in the ESG discussions in Brazil. The National Confederation of Industry is the main representative of the Brazilian industry in defending interests and promoting public policies. In this position, the CNI is responsible for the Executive Secretariat of the Brazilian section of the BRICS Business Council. About its initiative focused on ESG, last year the Confederation launched a report that brings together the contribution to ESG agenda in Brazil, demonstrating the actions developed by the organization. According to the Confederation, if before the concern about this issue was only a choice made by companies, today the ESG issues are a strategic priority. It also highlights that the Brazilian industry has the potential to be a protagonist in the efficient use of natural resources, aiming at the insertion of a low-carbon economy and increasing the participation in a global value chain. So the initiatives of this confederation includes low carbon economy, biodiversity on environmental issues, education, culture, occupational safety and health on social aspects, and transparency, legal security, fighting corruption, and regulation of lobby on governance aspects. So now I will change a subject a little bit, and I'm going to present the main aspects related to the ESG in the institutional governance of the BRICS Bank, trying to understand the place of environment and social issues in the institutional activities. So, well, the sustainable infrastructure projects in the bank are considered the central emphasis of the bank's operation, with a goal of dedicating 2/3 of the financing to the sector, intending to produce positive impact in social and environment terms. But despite the focus on sustainable infrastructure, the bank doesn't present a clear definition of what this concept means. So not even a specific criteria that are considered in this aspect. So this broad understanding ends up allowing the financing of projects that may question the bank's sustainable commitment, since the institutions could end up financing projects that may generate social environment project with negative impact. So, well, about the social and environment governance of the bank, it is important to note that the NDB country system approach use the broad country legislation instead of using international safeguard, which would prioritize national system and could encourage bank staff to suggest changes and indicate weakness in the national legislation. In the same time, this approach, in cases of weakness of local regulation, also can bring challenges, such as failure in social environment protection and lack of effectivity monitoring human rights violation in the national system. For this reason, the NDB Environment Social Framework is important to manage potential social environment risk and to encourage good practices, being NDB main instrument direct to the social environment issues in its projects. However, there are limitations in the bank's transparency. Although the website makes available the documents and the data about the projects, there are still difficulties in accessing information about the implementation process, not disclosing any detail about what happened after the approval. So this makes it difficult for this civil society to monitor and defend the rights of local communities. In this sense, the NDB needs to consolidate and enhance a dialogue channel with civil society and with the population affected by financing projects. So now I will try to show some example of the first financing of the NDB to Brazil. So although financing represents pathway towards a social environment governance, there are still limits and implications of NDB performance in certain cases. And one of the cases that deserve evidence is the Araripe Tree Wine Complex. This is the part of the first NDB financed for Brazil, which was done in partnership with the Brazilian Development Bank. If on the one hand, the project related to positive gains for the local community, such as a job generation and energy supply for the region, on the other hand, negative impacts began to be reported by the local population, generating effects on the environment, causing death of animals and higher incidence of lightning in the region. Therefore, it's possible to conclude that even in cases of financing direct sustainable sector, such as clean energy in this case, some negative social environment impacts end up occurring, showing limits and elements to improve in the NDB governance. So therefore, we can conclude that a high relevance of the ESG agenda in the international arena makes various actors take ESG issues into consideration. For this reason, the BRICS Business Council could be analyzed as one of the appropriate places for ESG discussions within the BRICS group, as it brings together the main business leaders of the 5 countries, providing potential for dialogue and cooperation on this topic. And the elaboration of concrete initiatives, as we say. Concerning NDB performance in the first year of operation, it was expected that being a bank created in 2014, it would also be innovative in its practice. However, the NDB social environment approach ends up showing gaps with low transparency in the design and implementation process and an absence of mechanisms that allow the participation of affected communities. So demonstrating elements that the bank still need to consolidate and improve, which maybe affect the institutional approach on ESG issues. So that's it. Thank you so much for the event organization, for the invitation to participate in this excellent roundtable. And I'll be happy to answer any question. And here is my contact info, if we can get in touch for further information.
Thank you, Rafaela. It was an excellent speech. I really like the BRICS Business Council and this important factor of ESG being a group of discussions. So very good, excellent speech. And also I really liked about the NDB, the New Development Bank that is operating already in Brazil. So congratulations. I think we will have some questions in the end of our speeches. So our next speaker will be Magalie Masamba. I'll introduce her once again. She's postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights. She was formerly postdoctoral researcher at Boston University's Global Development Policy Center, a legal specialist for the World Bank's PPP support program for Tanzania, and also Oxford Policy Fellow advising the Ministry of Finance and Planning of Zanzibar. So now, Magalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me please share my screen quickly. Sorry. I hope you can see my screen. Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll assume that you can. Okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this event, because it's a great opportunity to share some of my ideas, as well as to share some of the research that we've been doing at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, in conjunction with Oxfam South Africa, as well as the Civil Society Forum on the New Development Bank. Sorry, for some reason, I'm not able to maximize my slides, but hopefully they're clear enough. Yeah, so again, thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts specifically on the New Development Bank. And I think it's great to come after Rafaela, because she's provided a very good introduction to ESG broadly, and has kind of started touching on the challenges with the New Development Bank in the last half of her presentation. So when asked to speak about ESG, I decided to provide a practical perspective on what's going on in South Africa, specifically with projects that are being either funded or co-funded by the New Development Bank. And in trying to find a practical angle, I asked myself the question, how do we integrate environmental, social, and governance considerations into the provision of development finance? And how do we ensure that they benefit stakeholders in society more broadly? And in exploring this question, I wanted to provide like a mini case study of the experience of South Africa as well as Lesotho. And I really wanted to delve deeper into the issues of transparency and accountability, especially through access to information, as well as the question, how do we hold development financial institutions, especially the New Development Bank, accountable towards their own policies and their commitments, especially those that have an ESG component. So I'll alert you to two reports in the event that I'm not able to touch every aspect that I hope to cover in my short presentation. So these two discussion papers were launched earlier this year in a transparency and accountability series, which I was the lead author of. The first one is on enhancing the New Development Bank's practice of information disclosure. And the second one is why the need for an independent accountability mechanism at the New Development Bank. And these two reports kind of delve deeper into the question of why access to information or transparency, and why an independent accountability mechanism or general accountability are very important components of ESG. And if you may allow me the courtesy to just read one of the assertions that we've made in the report, we noted that transparency and access to information are essential to enable communities to exercise their voice and to effectively monitor and hold governments accountable for the impact of projects. So very closely linked the need for accountability of funders is really the issue of access to information. So these two components are quite linked. So the challenge of the lack of transparency, whether it is through, for example, not providing enough clarity on policies or providing project information, as well as the lack of accountability of a DFI towards its own policy itself in development projects, is that it makes it very difficult to see what a development financial institution is doing. It makes it difficult to see what is the impact of the projects that that institution is implementing. And really, it makes it difficult to see whether it's actually adhering to its ESG responsibilities. As such, the two reports that I've just highlighted kind of delve deeper into the need for transparency and accountability, which Rafaela already mentioned is a challenge when it comes to the new development bank. So let's look at what's happening on the ground with South Africa. So the NDB is basically one of, or at least the newest development financial institution to be part of the international development landscape. It currently has investments in the BRICS countries, and in Africa, it specifically has at least 10 projects in South Africa and 1 project in Lesotho, which is a neighboring country to South Africa. These investments are in various sectors that are of strategic importance to South Africa, such as the transport sector, clean energy, water resource management, supply and water resource management, supply and sanitation, as well as the bank provided the COVID-19 emergency program and loan. So if you have a sense of what's happening in South Africa, you know that South Africa currently has a major energy crisis. So of course, clean energy projects are very important. And of course, in the bigger cities, there's major challenges with utilities. So the water resource management project is another very important one. And in the presentation today, I'll be delving into 2 specific projects, or at least I'll mention them a few times. So I'll give you a little bit of an insight on what these projects are. So the first one is the Lesotho Highlands Water Project 2, which is basically the second component of an already existing project. So the Lesotho Highlands Water Project 2 is actually co-funded by the New Development Bank. So the total project cost is 32 billion rands, South African rands, and the New Development Bank is providing at least 3.2 billion rands. So this project is basically a joint project between the Republic of South Africa as well as the Kingdom of Lesotho. And the main aim of this project, or at least the main objective, is to augment water supply in the Vaal River Basin, which is a region in South Africa, by transferring water from Lesotho to South Africa. Now, this is a very environmentally sensitive project. It has been classified a category A in the New Development Bank's environmental social framework, and it has quite a number of negative environmental and social impacts that include, for example, issues to do with land acquisition and involuntary resettlement in Lesotho, losses of arable and grazing land and habitats for important flora and fauna, decreases in water flows, negative impacts on cultural heritage sites, issues with community safety during the construction phase, and even potential antisocial behavior, negative gender impacts because of the influx of construction workers. So that's the first project I'm going to be referring to. So that's the Lesotho Highlands Water Project 2. The second project that I'm going to refer to a number of times is what we call the Medupi project, or the official name is the Environmental Protection Project for Medupi Thermal Power Plant. So this project is much larger. It's $2,750 million US. The NDB, again, is a co-funder. It's providing $480 million of this project. And basically, this project has a very strong environmental potential because the main objective is actually to reduce sulfur dioxide levels. And the project includes the design and construction of at least 6 fuel gas desulfurization units. And again, it's a very sensitive project. It's a category A project. Among the negative or potential negative environmental and social impacts include risk related to labor strikes, social tensions with members of the community when it comes to issues of employment, and compromised road safety resulting from road accident rates. And these are some of the issues listed on the NDB's website, but we're aware of quite a number more issues. So while looking at these 2 projects, I'll make a few disclaimers. I think the first disclaimer is the fact that the NDB is a co-funder, so there are other development financial institutions involved. The second one is that the environmental and social frameworks or policies of other development banks, such as the African Development Bank, do apply, for example, in the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. And the third disclaimer I'll make is the fact that the environmental and social management plans designed under the project apply, as well as the country systems, which are the national laws of the host countries. So in making these, or in pointing out these issues, I think that you can already see that there's quite a number of questions that arise. For example, what happens with co-financed projects when there's different policies that apply? How do you hold an institution like the New Development Bank accountable to its own policies, for instance, when the African Development Bank's policies apply? You might also ask yourself the question, what about the national laws or the country systems? What happens when they're inadequate? That's a point that Rafaela actually mentioned in her presentation as well. So what happens when they're inadequate or when an implementing authority is not adhering to those rules? And really, what is the link between the New Development Bank's policies as well as the country systems? So going back to the research that we were doing in our two studies, or really in our transparency and accountability series, we had conversations with a leading civil society organization in Lesotho, dealing with the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, as well as a member of community or an activist who is doing quite a lot of work on the Medupi project. And we asked them a series of questions related to the project. For example, what are the challenges with the project that are being faced by the community with the project? So on the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, a lot of the issues that we heard about are echoed on the New Development Bank's website. For example, the social impact of migration, issues with resettlement and compensation, as well as issues with access to water resources of communities in Lesotho, which is quite ironic because it's a project that aims, to provide more access to water. And with the Medupi project, when speaking to the activist and community member who's doing a lot of work within the community, she highlighted the concern that the implementing authority, which is Eskom, which is the main power production company, a civil society, a state-owned enterprise in South Africa, has received loan after loan from different multilateral development banks to actually to install pollution abatement technology, but no progress has ever been made. This institution is, on the brink of bankruptcy, and there are concerns that there's a lot of confusion when it comes to this specific loan, because Eskom doesn't know the type of technology it wants to use, and we've been made aware of the major environmental impacts if this project is not successful. Now, in both instances of the two projects, or at least the two conversations that we had, we were made aware that there's also challenges with the grievance redress mechanism under the project. So in addition to the understanding what's going on the ground, we also asked questions like, do you have access to project documents? Which the answer was basically no. There was challenges with access to documents. Do you know who the funders of these projects are? there were challenges with limitations with knowledge on who the funders are. Do you know that the New Development Bank is one of the funders of the projects? They had not heard of the New Development Bank, were not aware of any of the policies of the New Development Bank. They were not aware of whether or not they can access information from the New Development Bank itself, especially where they're having issues at a national level accessing information. So this raised quite a lot of concerns, and I guess we had to kind of go back to the drawing board to see what does the New Development Bank actually say about transparency and accountability. So on paper, the New Development Bank seems to be a very transparent and open organization. So a couple of examples. In the Articles of Agreement, for example, it states that the bank should ensure that its procedures are transparent and shall elaborate on its own rules and procedures through specific provisions regarding to access of documents. And in line with the Articles of Association, the NDB actually implemented first an interim information disclosure policy, as well as a final disclosure policy in 2017. In addition to this, the environmental and social framework of the NDB in section 23 actually commits the bank to working with the clients or the implementing authorities to ensure that social and environmental documents are made available in a timely manner, in an accessible place, and in the form and language understandable to affected people and other stakeholders. So in addition to that, when you just look at the language on the NDB website, it states, for example, that the NDB believes in transparency and complete disclosure. It also states that, we are committed to ensure that our proceedings are transparent, and all our policies, procedures, and documents are publicly accessible. And if you look at, for example, the mission statement of the NDB, it even uses the adjective, or maybe I can say the verb of empathy in describing how it will conduct its investments, which is very different language from most multilateral development banks or development financial institutions. Empathy means putting yourself in the shoes of another person. So it's going to use empathy in how it conducts its operations. So while we had these conversations, and while we also looked at the policies of the NDB, the next thing was really to test whether we, as the University of Pretoria, Oxfam South Africa, as well as the Civil Society Forum on the NDB, which is a group within the Southern African region, a group of civil society organizations, community-based organizations, as well as NGOs that do advocacy work and research on the NDB, could actually access information that could help communities. So this was done through sending 3 information requests under the New Development Bank's information disclosure policy. So the first one related to questions on the COVID-19 emergency loan. And basically this information requested information on how those loans were utilized, and requested documents including, project performance assessment reports, progress reports, project monitoring reports, compliance reports, as well as administrative and financial appraisal mission reports, audited financial statements. And very similarly, on the second information request, which was on the Lesotho Highlands Water Project that I've just briefly described some of the issues of, we were asking for the nature of the policies that are going to apply to this project, because we knew that there may be use of African Development Bank policies. There was also a question on how exactly does accountability occur, especially in a co-finance projects where you have different policies of different DFIs applying. And finally, there's also a request for project-related documents, as was described in the previous slide. Now, with respect to these 2 information requests, the response of the NDB was a little bit vague. It was basically very similar in both instances, and it just stated that according to the information disclosure policy, the bank aims to publish project documents to the board for sovereign operations and summary documents for non-sovereign operations after board approval, and no further information was provided in either response with respect to the project documents, when they would be published, and so forth, what would be published and when it would be published. So while a response was given, the quality of the response raises questions. And I guess at this stage, I should also mention that, according to the information disclosure policy, you should receive acknowledgement of receipt after 5 days, which we did not. You should receive a response within 30 working days, which did not take place. We had to do continuous follow-up. So this really raised questions on the accountability of the NDB, and the main question being, why is it that the NDB does not have an independent accountability mechanism? So an IAM, or independent accountability mechanism, is basically a platform in which project affected communities and other stakeholders, such as civil society organizations, researchers like ourselves, and so forth, can raise their concerns about alleged harm or potential harm of a project. And the reason why an IAM is very important is that it basically holds development financial institutions and their clients accountable to the DFI's actual, policies, and it provides community members or project affected community members with remedies when there's harm or potential harm. So this prompted a third information request on an independent accountability mechanism, and the questions posed to the NDB here were basically, what are the prospects of you developing an IAM? What could be the possible structure of that IAM, bearing in mind that almost every multilateral development bank has independent accountability mechanism, and there's decades of learning on best practice and why you should have one. We asked about the procedures to operationalize a potential mechanism. We asked about what issues would be dealt with, as well as what would be the relationship between the NDB, a potential NDB, independent accountability mechanism, and grievance redress mechanisms that already exist at a project level. So the response of the NDB here, again, as I mentioned, there was no confirmation of receipt of the request. The platform is not particularly user-friendly. I had to request an email address because I struggled to find which email address should be used to send this request. But when it comes to the contents of the response, it was that the NDB is actually developing an IAM, and that a compliance and investigations department would basically be in charge of grievance redress and complaints from individuals, communities, and organizations. And beyond this, no further information was given to the plethora of questions that we actually had. And again, this raises a question on how are some of these policies, tools, mechanisms developed, and why is it that there's no stakeholder engagement? So I hope I have a few more minutes to kind of wrap up and to provide a few ideas, because in our view, our report not only highlighted some of the challenges on the ground and the fact that it's not that easy for communities to actually stand up for themselves. It's not easy for civil society organizations, community-based organizations, NGOs to provide support to communities, because they're quite handicapped because they have very limited access to information on projects that the NDB is involved in. Not only that, it's very difficult to hold the NDB accountable to its own policies without an independent accountability mechanism. But to us, this also presents opportunities to actually improve the NDB, because it is, as I mentioned earlier, a very young multilateral development bank. So just a few of the ideas or policy recommendations that appear in our report include the fact that there is a need for a functioning structure or platform that communities and people can actually access project documents. So far you just have summaries of projects. You don't actually have the project documents easily accessible online. Secondly, the NDB actually needs to endeavor to disclose project documents and information at all stages of the project life cycle, not only after board approval. Thirdly, while we do acknowledge that there are exceptions to disclosure, so there are instances where it might cause more harm to disclose certain project information that is, for example, market sensitive information. There should be a preference for more transparency rather than less, especially if you look at, the wording on the NDB's website. And fourthly, the NDB also needs to provide clarity on Section 23 of the Environmental Social Framework, that states that they're going to provide, these environmental social documents in a manner and language that are well understood. So these are the recommendations on transparency. And finally, the recommendations on accountability, of course, is the main one that the NDB needs to develop an independent accountability mechanism. But not only does it need to develop it, it needs to do so using public consultations that take into account the views of different stakeholders, including the project affected persons, civil society organizations, and community groups. Secondly, that independent accountability mechanisms needs to have a very simple complaints process with minimal barriers to entry, and whose jurisdiction is broad enough, and that the admissibility rules should not require, for example, exhausting some other local, remedy or a local redress mechanism at a national or a project level. However, I'll refer you back to the two reports if you'd like to see a detailed assessment of the recommendations, the ideas, and I'm happy to share more thoughts on this, as well as to answer any questions that you may have. Moderator, I hope I've been stuck to my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Magalie. It was very interesting, all the information about the NDB in South Africa. I really like the two projects, the Highland Water Project Phase 2, and also the Medupi Thermal Power Plant. And we have already one question from our audience. I think I can do this question because it's directly to Magalie. Dear Magalie, you mentioned that NDB's assessments of risks leaves out some other risks related to the implementation of projects on the ground. Do you see social communities being able to reach the bank in order to have these other risks taken into consideration? If not, what are your suggestions in order for those concerns to be heard? That's one question of one of our students. Magalie, we need
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a very, very good question. It's a pertinent question because it kind of summarizes the challenge that I've described, and I believe that Rafaela started to describe in her presentation when she spoke about the NDB. So when it comes to the NDB, what we've seen is that there's a lot of issues or concerns on the ground that are not really reaching the NDB, it seems. And because the New Development Bank really relies on country systems and doesn't interfere as much, it raises a lot of concerns. So it's very difficult for communities to kind of go back and have that, discussions directly with the NDB. You always have to rely on country systems that have proven to have major issues. So the main recommendation in our presentation that is really, really important to give community members a voice is an independent accountability mechanism. So this will be a mechanism housed within the NDB, but that is independent, and that community members can directly interact or engage with. Now, the question is, how do you create this mechanism to be user-friendly, to be simple, and to be relevant to those communities? To answer that question, you have to engage with the communities, you have to engage with the stakeholders when you're developing this independent accountability mechanism. We've just heard rumors that this IAM is being developed. There's been no public consultations at all, no public information other than, responses in the email, as well as, some thoughts from staff members at the NDB. So the problem or the challenges are very clear, but the evidence is also clear on why an IAM is a very important tool for community members. I hope that answers the questions, but if it doesn't, I'll be happy to elaborate.
Thank you, Magalie. Thank you very much for your excellent speech. And now I'm gonna introduce Rukmani Joshi. Once again, she's assistant professor of political science at School of Humanities and Social Sciences from Sharda University, Greater Noida. She has completed her PhD from Center of the Study of Law and Governance at JNU from New Delhi. She has been recipient of Indian Council for Social Science Research Doctoral Fellowship for the year of 2014 and 2016. And her speech will be about environmental and social governance and corporate social responsibility in the Indian perspective. So I'm gonna pass now to Rukmani Joshi. Please, Rukmani, time's yours.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my views. It's an honor for me. And I would like to say that the shift in the understanding of the concept of development from economic to human, and the shift from government to governance, and now this buzzword, the corporate social responsibility, led me to analyze the interlinkage between development discourse and environmental social governance, especially in the special reference to a country like India, which is highly populated, have many challenges, and trying to develop. However, in today's talk, I will be focusing only on corporate social responsibility, how it has evolved in Indian context. And my study claims that though corporate social responsibility is an age-old tradition in India, but it is still evolving, transforming as per the changes in the time, as per the requirements of the time. And to elaborate on it, at the very outset, I would like to start my speech with the statement made by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in 1999 while addressing the World Economic Forum in Davos. He said, "We have to choose between a global market driven only by calculations of short-term profit and the one which has a human face. Between a world which condemns a quarter of the human race to starvation and squalor and the one which offers everyone at least a chance of prosperity in a healthy environment. Between a selfish free-for-all in which we ignore the fate of the losers, or a future in which the strong and successful accept their responsibilities, showing vision and leadership." With this, I would like to say corporate social responsibility as a notion is on the rise all over the world and has emerged as a topic of concern among corporates, governments, and international business forums due to various reasons such as climate change, global warming, wide divide of wealth, customer preferences of ethical business practices, and etc. And media support has further fueled this fire. In this global age, social, economic, and political problems merge into one another as to the solutions. And in response, corporate social responsibility has emerged as an inescapable priority for business leaders and as a response to new conditions, challenges, and new opportunities. In India, corporate social responsibility is not a new phenomenon. It has been an age-old concept which has been seen as philanthropy, charity, social giving in the past. Most of the business houses or business families have been taking up issues of their respective interests and investing in them. But over the time, especially with globalization, the demands are changing this definition of corporate social responsibility. Now it is more than philanthropy. So generally or usually, corporate social responsibility, which is understood to be the way a company achieves a balance or integration of economic, environmental, and social initiatives, while at the same time addressing shareholders and stakeholders' expectations. It is about meeting the current needs and ensuring the future generations' needs are not compromised upon. It is increasingly being appreciated that the success of business is inextricably tied to the welfare and stability of the community. People and planet have a part to play alongside profit. And this calls for a new corporate logic in which caring for employees, communities, and environment is not only seen as morally correct, but also the best approach for community and profitability. Government, activists, and the media have become adept at holding companies accountable for the consequences of these actions. In my study, the various case studies which we have taken, for example, the Jalandhar-based Sports Goods Foundation of India, which organizes a campaign for the abolition of child labor from sports good industry and for the promotion of child education, or the case of Hyderabad-based S. Kumar's Agri-Business Corporation has set its mission to initiate change through innovative, sustainable, eco-friendly green initiatives. The company's CSR foundation, which is known as Green Universe Environmental Service Society, has emerged out of the company's firm belief and steadfast commitment to promote sustainable livelihood while protecting the environment in rural and remote areas. Another case study which is under place, the Ahmedabad-based Shashwat Systems has established the Shashwat Foundation, where they promote women enterprises throughout Gujarat and serves with missionary zeal as a teacher, guide, and mentor to the numerous young and aspiring women entrepreneurs in the state. So all these case studies led to a conclusion that, or suggests that, there are four models of social responsibility which can be identified as operating in India. The first model, which we can witness, is the voluntary commitment to public welfare based on ethical awareness of broad social needs, which is also known as the Gandhian model. The another model is state-driven policies, including state ownership and extensive corporate regulation and administration, known as the Nehru model. The third is the Milton Friedman model, where we see the corporate responsibility primarily focused on owner's objective. And the fourth and the last model is the stakeholders' responsiveness, which recognizes direct and indirect stakeholder interests, which is the Freeman model. So all these four models are implemented, are operating in India when it comes to the corporate social responsibility, which led us to say that, or to suggest that, though CSR was practiced in India for many years and has undergone a transformation as a result of its exposure to the Western approach pursued by transnational corporations on Indian soil. And another reason for the change in that approach can be attributed to Indian companies venturing into the global arena to compete with the rest of the world. The trends which followed worldwide have not only created awareness, but have also put pressure on Indian companies to reevaluate their corporate social responsibility endeavors and to align them with the global trends. Through corporate philanthropy and community development, still remain a strong aspect of India's corporate social responsibility. Globalization has led to the emergence of a multi-stakeholder approach. And under such approach, companies are responsible for all stakeholders, a term that includes employees and both community and financial stakeholders. This approach requires CSR be integrated into a sustainable business strategy. The key to being more sustainable is for a business to adopt, demonstrate, and practice more holistic approaches to businesses where financial drivers together with sustainable development performance, that is social equity, environmental protection, and economic growth, are incorporated into mainstream business strategies and embedded in organizational values. Triple bottom line, or the triple P, the people, planet, and profit, is the mantra of the day for success. And India have huge expectations for companies, both global and domestic, and would like them to step forward and take responsibility in the societies or communities in which they are operating by adopting responsible practices. In addition to providing good quality products at reasonable prices, companies should strive to make their operations environmentally sound, adhere to high labor standards, reduce human rights abuses, and mitigate poverty. Adoption of these practices is critical to the business because business cannot survive, let alone succeed, in a society that fails. So, public acceptance of the operation of any business, particularly in an alien society, often determines the success of the corporation, and acceptance will come only is seen having respect for the aspirations. Am I audible?
Rukmani, could you repeat the last phrase?
Yeah, I will. So what I was trying to say is that it's not only about providing good quality products at reasonable prices. It's also about adoption of practices, which is critical to the business because business cannot survive or alone succeed in a society which fails, a society which has challenges. So it's a corporate social responsibility, having empathy for the aspirations and values of the society in which it functions. And investors now often consider the social performance of the company when making investment decisions. So my study suggests that number one has to integrate CSR into business strategies as opposed to practicing sporadic corporate philanthropy. In the age of globalization and the perpetual expansion of international market, it is crucial and critical that India open itself to the global trends and aligns its CSR initiatives with those in trends by integrating CSRs into a sustainable business strategy. Second, it needs to promote multi-stakeholder stakeholders. CSR is strictly about contributing and giving back to the society. A multi-stakeholder approach which involves all of the company's stakeholders in the development and implementation of its CSR initiatives. Third, it needs to spread the CSR along the supply chain, where I mean consumers increasingly demand that companies act responsibly and that their responsible practices involve all of the stakeholders in their value chain. violation of law or abusive practices occurring in the facilities of the supplier bring as much negative publicity to the corporations as its own acts. So it needs to value the supply chain. And fourth, it in the concept of corporate social responsibility, it should promote public-private partnership. Public-private partnership have paved the way for successful CSR initiatives elsewhere in the world and can be proved beneficial to India as well. Public-private initiatives are understood as a system in which government service is funded and operated through a partnership between the government and one or more private sector companies with the aim of stimulating economic growth and social development. So these are the recommendations which our study suggests for the elaboration and the evolvement of this concept of corporate social responsibility in context of India. With these words, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Rukmani. It was an excellent speech. I really like the 3 Ps: people, planet, and profits. You were saying about the economic growth, adopting responsibilities, practices, and reduce human rights abuses. It was really excellent to know about the Indian perspective. I think we have more 10 minutes to go, and I already received one more question. This is for Rukmani. How can transparency be promoted considering BRICS countries, minorities, and the existence of multiple languages? Is there some initiative for cooperation with domestic public administration in order to contribute with access to information in this matter? How does BRICS administration lead with idiomatic plurality? I don't know if this question is to Magalie or to Rukmani. It's about transparency.
Yeah, it's about transparency, but I didn't get the last part of the question.
How does BRICS administration lead with this problem with the languages? That's it.
Okay, so as far as I can understand, it is about the diversity, that how this the concept of diversity can be included and can be made more transparent within this notion of corporate social responsibility. So yes, as far as the laws of the nation, especially the guidelines for the corporates by the public service departments have come in by Government of India in 2009. It says that it is the responsibility of the firms to come up with their initiatives even in the local languages. So those corporate houses which are working in the field of education, in the field of skill development, they need to develop those skills of languages too. And their reports need to be published in colloquial language also. So I believe with that, they will be able to overcome this barrier of transparency, or I would say they will be more transparent in terms of explaining their initiatives and the outcomes which they have achieved.
Thank you, Rukmani. I have one more question now to Magalie. It's a student from USP. NDB focus on helping developing countries to build their own infrastructure while also taking into consideration social and environment questions. I would like to know if environmental and social questions increase the cost of borrowing from the NDB. That's one more question to Magalie.
Thomas, if I may ask a question for Magalie too, just to complement this.
Of course, Rafael.
Okay, I would just like to comment the publication, the Magalie comment was very helpful in my research on NDB. And I have been facing similar challenges in my research on the project in Brazil for my master dissertation and the research I have been made in the BRICS Policy Center about the NDB too. So in the sense, I would like to ask Magalie, how the research work with the local communities affected in the project is carried out, how it happens. If you could give details about this process, it could help me a lot, because the case here in Brazil that we have more information is the Araripe, but it's almost the only one, and we want to gather more information about the others. So to help, thank you.
Thank you. So on the first question on the cost of finance, definitely, of course, the more risky that a project is, the more expensive it is, the more, I guess the second point is, the more that there's a need for example, environmental mitigation, social mitigation, of course, that impacts the cost of capital. So if you need to resettle, you need to pay resettlement compensation, that obviously makes a project more expensive. And of course, some projects are just so risky that they're not attractive to financiers. So it really depends. And of course, there's different categories when it comes to the environmental and social risks. And of course, that impacts the cost of capital. And on Rafaela's question, which I'd be happy to chat more as well offline, because yeah, the research on the NDB has been very frustrating. It's not that easy because of the lack of information. But when it comes to the research methodology for engaging with local communities, I mean, we struggled really to find, especially in Lesotho, to find information from local communities, and we had to use some of the members of the civil society forum on the New Development Bank that had been doing research in Lesotho. We were only able to communicate with one civil society organization, but we found their contributions very authoritative, only because they've done a lot of work in that region and they were the main civil society organization. But generally for your master's thesis, I think you'll need more than just one organization. And with the Majupi project, the person we spoke to is one of the main activists working in that area, and she's also a community member and had a very strong track record with working with women in the area. So even just engaging with the communities was not that simple, but I'd be happy to chat more about research methodologies with you and to hear more about your research offline as well.
Thank you, Magalie. Thank you, Rafaela. I just received one more question now for Rafaela. It's one of our students also. Apart from the BRICS Business Council, any other BRICS instance is implementing ESG in their regulation? This question is for Rafaela. Please, Rafaela.
Well, my focus on the master dissertation was on the BBC, the BRICS Business Council, but I didn't research about the others initiatives. But in my what I think is that the BRICS Business Council is the more appropriate space for this, because reunite all the companies and the leaders, CEOs, and could be the most appropriate space for this. So we can find another instance, but it's just I think it's a side organization, not the main focus. I think the BRICS Business Council is the foundation for this agenda.
And I have one more question to Rafaela now. How do you see the lack of precision in defining sustainable infrastructure impacting the effectiveness of NDB agenda in Brazil, Rafaela, another student of our BRICS group?
Mm-hmm. Well, about the Araripe case, we could see a lot of environment and social negative impact. This is a very specific example of this broad conceptualization about infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure, because the concept could translate all the criteria that the bank need to do. So another question, not in Brazil, but in all the institutional projects, in China, we have, I think, 2 cases of financing of natural gas. And this is some questions about the energy transition process, because the bank classified as a clean energy project, but we can questions about this quality of the project and the finance. So this could be some specific example of the problematic of the broad conceptualization on infrastructure sustainable.
I have one more question now for Rafaela, and later I'll give Magalie and also Rukmani to answer the question also, and to give your final consideration, Magalie, because we have about more 10 minutes to end. So I'll ask one more question to Rafaela, and then I'll pass to Magalie and then Rukmani. Rafaela, as you mentioned, ESG is gaining more relevance in the international scenario. Does other international organizations monitors ESG implementation in BRICS? That's one question.
Well, I didn't know for sure. I think this is some specific question that I need to research, but we can keep in touch to get this information. So just to do my final remarks, I would like to thank you again for the event organization and for this invitation, because it was a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafaela. So Magalie, you can do your final remarks also of this important panel about ESG, please, Magalie.
Thank you so much. I think my final remark is really just a conclusion that I think there's a need to go beyond just talking about ESG in a theoretical perspective or mentioning the right language in policies, documents, on websites. There's a need to really make ESG implementation real on the ground, because at the end of the day, finance development projects are about people. So behind the numbers, behind the policies, the documents are real people's lives. And I think it's really time to make things real, to make things practical, and not to have, box ticking exercise, for example, saying we are transparent, we will give you information, but not give real information. So that's my main conclusion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Magalie. And I'll pass to Rukmani also to give your final remarks. Rukmani, please.
Yeah. In the end, I would also like to say, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I very much agree with my previous speaker, Magalie, who said that, yes, it is a high time that we need to work on implement these goals which we set for us, especially in terms of environmental and social governance. Only tick boxing is not going to work. We have seen setting agendas like MDGs for us, now SDGs for us, but we really need to work on the ground, and not only in terms of as an agendas at international levels and discussing them at international forums, but we need to really work on ground with the specificities required. So it's a high time to work on. If don't, then it's going to be worse for us.
Thank you very much,
focus on people, planet, and profit equally.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody, all of our authorities here in this panel. It was an excellent presentation of all of you guys, Rafaela, Magalie in South Africa, Rukmani in India. So I want to thank the organization. I want to thank once again the Center for BRICS Studies of Law Faculty of University of São Paulo. And thank you, everybody.
Thomas,
thank you.
A gente pode pedir uma foto por todos os participantes olhando para a tela. Se todo mundo
Ah,
olhar para
tá
a
bom.
tela, eu vou fazer uma foto aqui.
Rafa wants to take a picture of everybody in the screen. Deu certo, Rafa? Rafa?
Ah, deu certo. Muito obrigado. Desculpa, esqueci de avisar.
Okay, so thank you very much. It was really interesting, all the information. And we from our institute and from Gibrix, we want to do next year once again, one more conference. So thank you very much, Magalie. Thank you very much, Rukmani. Thank you very much, Rafaela. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.